private lies, public fictions. It's great to see everyone here today. It's really nice to see friendly faces and new faces, people from Wales and also people internationally. We've got international speakers here today. I'm Emma from Safety First Wales and I'll be chairing the event today. This is a panel event to launch the exhibition, which is around you, and also the zine, which if you haven't seen, we've got copies at the front and we encourage you to grab a copy and look through it. It's a soft launch, so if there's any grammatical errors, please let us know. We'll be hard launching. Yes, we'll be hard launching on the 17th of December, which for those of you who don't know is International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. So this event is part of the Festival of Social Sciences, which is hosted by Swansea University and funded by the ESRC, which is the Economic Social Research Council. We're very appreciative of their help. And before we begin, we have a wonderful photographer, Jamila, here today. She's going to be taking photos throughout, and if you prefer not to be photographed, please let me know, or Jamila know, and we'll make sure that we don't post any of your faces in. And that is because, as most of us know, confidentiality is a priority.
Emma, could you speak just a little bit slower?
Yeah.
Sitting back here.
Yeah, Carrie, you can sit there.
Carrie, why don't you just come and sit here, because hopefully somebody does. Carrie, sit there, because it looks better on the photo.
I'll sit
Sorry. Hold off already. Okay, so this afternoon, as I mentioned, we are launching the exhibition and also the zine, which is called Dim Model Nordic, which means no Nordic model in Welsh, and we'll be explaining the dangers of criminalisation and what this means for sex workers here in Wales, as also beyond Wales. And this has come out of organising and research that has continuously supported this. We have our lovely panel members here who will speak to that. And most importantly, we're here today to hear directly from sex workers themselves on the dangers of criminalisation and also to galvanise support for decriminalisation and against the Nordic model. For those of you who were unable to join us at our very successful launch at the Senate last year, Safety First Wales is a coalition of sex workers and supporters campaigning for the full decriminalisation of sex work and the prioritisation of resources and support to sex workers to enable them to leave sex work if and when they choose to. So we officially launched last November, and since then we have been working relentlessly to fight against laws and practices that harm sex workers across Wales. Part of today's event is to bring to you the reality of sex workers here in Wales. And because criminal justice isn't devolved, the laws that sex workers are governed under are actually made in Westminster. And under these laws, sex workers are threatened with arrest, issued prostitute cautions, which stay on your record for up to, well, for 100 years, and there's no right of appeal. And I think we'll be hearing a little bit about that today. And also sex workers are raided and prosecuted for adopting safer working practices. And in many cases, women are imprisoned for working on the street. The majority of sex workers are mums, mainly single mums, working to feed themselves and their children. And in Wales, some of you may know, we have the worst child poverty rate of all UK nations. But instead of focusing on addressing this, the government and the police continue to criminalise and punish sex workers for refusing poverty and refusing to address the fact that mums are working to survive, to feed themselves and their children. The sex workers are punished for refusing poverty, for choosing to survive over destitution. These harms don't affect people evenly. They are exacerbated for street workers, for migrant workers, for trans workers, women of colour, women of disabilities, and all of these people are disproportionately targeted. And for those with insecure immigration status, the effect of criminalisation is worsened by the fear of deportation. And this isn't just an abstract policy debate, this is something that's happening here in Wales and here in Swansea. We've had cases of brothel keeping that have been brought to the court in Swansea this summer. We have mums in our network who are threatened by social services for working to support their children. Women are fighting against unjust cautions and convictions, and through it all, sex workers are forced to hide their work to avoid the combination of criminalisation and stigmatisation. There is overwhelming international evidence that shows further criminalisation decreases safety. The removal of all laws surrounding sex work is the only way, so decriminalisation is the only way to increase safety, health, well-being and rights of sex workers. Countries that have decriminalised sex work have shown to increase safety, Sex workers can report violence without fear of arrest, less discrimination, less stigma, and it recognises sex work contribution to communities. Decriminalisation is sponsored by Amnesty International, who we have here today, the Royal College of Nursing, the World Health Organization, UNAIDS, Human Rights Watch, Global Alliance Against Trafficking in Women, and hundreds of worldwide organisations. Here at Safety First Wales, both myself and Sam have conducted research about the harms of criminalisation, and these findings show exactly what sex workers have been calling about for decades, that criminalisation pushes sex work further underground, making it harder for women to stay safe. And yet, despite decades of evidence and tireless organising, local MPs, who will be hearing and naming and shaming today, have continued with recent efforts this year to push for further criminalisation. These politicians are actively ignoring sex workers. Sex workers are calling out, but they are ignoring the very people whose lives these policies endanger. And that is then what we mean by public fictions. It is these stories and narratives that shape policy to attempt to silence and ignore those who it affects. So let's be clear, any criminalisation, including the Nordic model, the criminalisation of clients, makes sex work more dangerous for everyone. It does nothing to address sex workers' rights, safety, health and well-being. So we are here today, holding this exhibition and zine launch, not to say that this organising hasn't been done. We know from ECP, who are here today, they've been organising since the 70s. But we're here to increase the visibility of sex workers' voices in Wales and to stand together against the policies of hatred and misinformation. Thank you. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to kick off the panel event. We're going to be having comments from the floor afterwards, so it's not going to be a Q&A throughout, purely because we have a very massive panel. And we're going to start.
Much to Safety First Wales, especially Emma and Sam, for putting this on. It's such an incredible exhibition. The zine is amazing, so very well done both of you. So I'm from Scotland for Decrim. We are a sex worker-led grassroots organisation dedicated to fighting for the full decriminalisation of sex work in Scotland. We're currently fighting a bill that's going through the Scottish Parliament at the moment that seeks to introduce the Nordic model. So, like most grassroots movements, it did start with a WhatsApp group chat. Not only was this a place to organise, but also to share probably too many memes. To moan about the challenges facing sex workers during this awful political climate, and most importantly, a place to create community for so many of us who didn't have that elsewhere. And then on December 12th, 2024, just last year, we officially launched with a protest outside the Scottish Parliament, and we very quickly learned that having a protest in the dead of winter at night outside in Scotland was not our best idea. But we learn, we grow, we move on. Our members come from all walks of life. Of course, most of us are sex workers. Some of us are also academics. Some of us are trade unionists, guilty of that as well. Others work in the third sector. We have many talented artists too. That was definitely not me. But what unites us is a common goal to see the decriminalisation of sex work in our lifetime. And we will win this, I've decided. Yeah. We want this because all of the evidence shows that it creates the safest environment for sex workers, because we want to be able to form trade unions and advocate on our own behalf, just like any other worker has the right to. We know that to criminalise something is to make it more dangerous and push it further underground. Now, I don't know how many of you have kept up with Scottish politics, but just on the word underground. Apparently I do need to clarify, I don't mean in literal underground cellars. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, let me tell you, because I love telling this story. So, from the woman who's trying to introduce the Nordic model, her name is Ash Regan. Cue the boos from the crowd, please. So when asked by a journalist about concerns that this bill would drive sex work further underground, she answered, oh, this is so good, "You cannot possibly drive prostitution underground. If you had a lot of women in underground cellars with a locked door, how would the punters get to them?" But rather than focus on our opponent, sorry,
I said Philomena Kunk style.
She dead meant it. She absolutely meant it. So anyway, rather than focus on our opponent, I want to draw your attention to the other strides that we've been making this past year. So we've met with quite a number of MSPs now, although the Tories have not replied to us, and I can't really say that I'm that sad about that. But so many were actually interested in what we had to say, and were shocked to hear that nobody currently selling sex had been introduced to, or sorry, consulted with during the creation of this dangerous bill. That's just outrageous. How many other groups would that happen to in this day and age? You know, the Scottish Parliament, it's called the People's Parliament, and well, we can get into that another time. But it's meant to include the people who bills will affect in the legislation, and it hasn't in this case. So we put evidence to them from organisations such as Amnesty International and the World Health Organisation that prove that decriminalisation is the only way forward. And people are starting to listen and take us very seriously in a way that wasn't even happening a few years ago. We've spoken with local community groups, trade unions, the women's sector, the third sector, and a number of academics, and so many people were open-minded and really wanted to hear what we had to say. On the other side, I did speak to a lot of people who didn't want to hear what we had to say, and managed to convince a lot of them anyway. Being persistent, or what some people may call annoying, is one of my many skills that I'm happy to use on behalf of Scotland for Decrim. This persistence also led us to meeting with the Minister in charge of this area. Becky also attended this and did an amazing job at highlighting the lack of engagement with any actual sex workers. Instead, they kept telling us what the police said that sex workers wanted, what the police said that sex workers were telling them. Exactly, right. We've also had quite a lot of success with media, which again was typically hostile to us, but we've worked with Channel 4 News, The Herald, Scottish Life Review and BBC Scotland. We also are coordinating the response to the Criminal Justice Committee, who are scrutinising the bill at the moment. We received solidarity from so many different corners of the world, literally from New York to New Zealand, so many different people, from ASLEF, the train drivers union, love the trains, to the Scottish Drug Forum, and to most of the people on this panel as well. We can all recognise that our struggles are the same, and the only way that we can win is if we come together. We cannot thank you enough for this genuine solidarity. Oh, right, sorry, getting emotional. I need to roll it back in. So, we gave oral evidence recently to the Criminal Justice Committee. Thank you again to Nikki from English Collective of Prostitutes, and Lindsay Walton, who's not here, but she's the CEO of National Ugly Mugs. We were asked if any of our members were pimps.
Yeah.
First of all, if they were, we would have a lot more money. But we're not dealing with people who are engaging in good faith. They don't actually want to hear from us. We're not dealing with people who understand the realities of selling sex. Again, let's go back to the underground seller comment. And just yesterday it was revealed that this bill is being supported by a group called the Religious Sisters of Charity. The very people who ran the fucking Magdalene laundries.
Yeah, really.
Okay? And these are the so-called feminists fighting for women's rights. Give me a break. Okay. Our next goals, once we defeat the bill, and again I've already said that we're going to, so manifest people, is to change Scottish Government policy on so-called commercial sexual exploitation, which puts trafficking and consensual sex work under the same banner. This is a Nordic model in all but legislation at this point. In-demand policies do not work. They create a more dangerous environment for sex workers, and importantly, it does nothing whatsoever to tackle stigma. We need all of you for that fight when the new Parliament begins in May. What kind of future do we want for sex workers, I hear you ask? We want to see rent controls and access to good, stable housing for all. We actually recently won rent controls in the Scottish Parliament. It's not perfect, but my God, is it better than what we had before. We want free childcare that actually covers the number of hours that people need. We want to ensure that disabled people receive all that we are entitled to without being investigated. We want our trans brothers, sisters and siblings to be safe and loved. We want to end racism and the horrific tax on migrants, and we want to end the genocide of Palestinians by the Israeli state. We want a world which is better for all of us. Only these methods will combat exploitation and abuse. Only we as workers and friends can achieve this. We cannot thank you enough for all that you have done for the movement, whether that's been emailing politicians, responding to the committee's call for views, to passing motions at trade union conferences, speaking to the people in your circles about decriminalisation. Every single action counts and every single action gets us closer to our goals. We can and we will win decriminalisation, but we need all of us working together. We need solidarity now more than ever. And today in this room, with all of you here, I know we can achieve this. Thank you very much, and let's beat this bill.
Yeah, I'm Nikki. I'm from the English Collective of Prostitutes. I'm here with my colleague Carrie as well. We started in 1975, which makes us 50 years old. Yeah. And you want to know more about our history? We have a lovely little zine as well that just got produced because we had a lovely event in London to celebrate our 50th year anniversary, along with colleagues from what was Wages Due Lesbians Queer Strike and Black Women for Wages for Housework, which is now Women of Colour in the Global Women's Strike. We were very pleased to be able to help form Safety First Wales right from the beginning. In fact, I think it was Sam that first got in touch with us about some raids and arrests that were happening in Wales, and I wanted to say first of all a bit about how Safety First Wales has really helped us. I think the fact that it's a coalition but that it's sex worker led has meant that right from the beginning it's really represented the needs and interests of sex workers, and that's quite path breaking because the terrain in Wales, as I understood it, was very similar to what we face in other parts of the UK, where the people that spoke for sex workers were not sex workers themselves. They were often professionals or the police, as we've heard, whose opinion seems to matter. But Safety First Wales really started with that basic principle, and it meant that when it came to what issues it put forward, it really did represent us. So it didn't have any of the kind of bullshit about the police that, you know, it's just a few bad apples. The real truth about what the police, the kind of policing that we face as sex workers came out right from the beginning. It had it was very helpful in dismantling the kind of stereotypes that we're often up against, like either the poor victim or the happy hooker. So a much more accurate representation of who sex workers are came across and was visible. And it also pressed, as we do in the English Collective of Prostitutes, for money and resources to go directly to sex workers, not to intermediaries, not to the organisations that kind of profit off of us being sex workers, but directly to women, and it prioritised the situation of mothers as well. The idea of Safety First Wales came from a Safety First coalition that we formed in 2006 in the aftermath of the tragic murder of 5 sex workers in Ipswich. I don't know if many of you remember that. It was a really horrific moment. And the thing that was key about that for us, though, was that the media expected to go to Ipswich and find a lot of judgmental attitudes against sex workers. And instead what they found was really a groundswell of support and compassion for sex workers, and people who understood that the criminalisation was what made it more dangerous. And they even said things like, we don't support the police crackdowns, which had been happening right up until the murders started. We don't mind sex workers working in our neighbourhood. You know, we preferred that we saw them there and knew that they were safe than they're in some kind of wooded area or isolated. And so it was on that basis that we built a coalition that did bring together things like the Royal College of Nursing, Women Against Rape, a lot of local residents, and really a lot of people from many different sectors. And we had a really big impact because there was a voice there for sex workers against the professionals who were also moving in. I mean, many of them did end up profiting, I have to say, but we still had a very big impact. And just on that question of kind of building a coalition, we were often forced into that position because when we started, we were completely ostracised and attacked by the established feminist lobby. I don't know what to call them. I keep on thinking, are they a feminist movement? No, they're not a movement. You know, establishment feminists. I quite like that. Maybe that's what I'll call them. Establishment feminists. You know, they banned us from their women's centre. I mean, a whole thing. So we were forced to find other people that would support us. And we often found it in quite surprising ways, actually. I mean, people like in the church who really thought that poverty was a much bigger immorality than women going into prostitution. One example of that is that when we occupied the Holy Cross Church in 1982 for 12 days against police illegality and racism, and had a big banner outside the church that said "Mothers need money," we did get a lot of support from local residents, you know, a whole set of other people. Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp came to support us. You know, gay men came and brought us food. And at that point, we also had a policy of not saying who was and who wasn't working, which was a very big protection. And we had non-sex working spokeswomen, people that spoke for us, but they did it in a way that was really accountable to us. And so we also went into the church with Black Women for Wages for Housework and Women Against Rape, and that was a really big protection for us. And we had started as an autonomous organisation within the Wages for Housework campaign. So while we were being ostracised by a certain, you know, group of feminists, we did have a lot of support from other grassroots organisations, including those within that campaign. When we were doing work in Soho, which is a red light area in London, where women are generally working in walk-up flats, so they have an open door and a, you know, neon light above the door and everything. The police had come in with massive braids and stuff, and we did a big campaign against the evictions and the arrests. It's mainly migrant sex workers working there, and again, none of the feminist kind of establishment supported us in that. And one of the reasons for that was that they had really bought into the way that trafficking was being put forward. Because trafficking, we had said, trafficking is being used as anti-immigration controls. It's used to justify raids and arrests and deportations. And instead of siding with us as sex workers against the police and against the immigration authorities, they'd gone completely along with it, and that was because there was funding there. They were more interested in the funding in their own careers than in standing with people that were being persecuted by the authorities. I won't go into the private prosecution. You'll have to read about it in here, sorry. No time. Just more recently, we've been working with Support Not Separation, who are also here tonight. Not tonight, you've got more going on it. Today, this afternoon, because a lot of women in our network have more visibly being threatened with having their children taken away and facing very judgmental social workers who say things to women like, "You love men and money more than your kids," you know, that kind of thing, and then threaten to take their kids away. And so that's become a big piece of work as well. Sorry, I should have said with Soho, we did win, by the way. I'm supposed to talk about our victories, yeah. 20 of the flats that they closed, we actually got reopened, which was really amazing considering what we were up against. And just more recently with Decrim Now, who's also here today, we've been fighting against amendments to the Crime and Policing Bill that was put forward by Tonia Antionazzi, who is a Welsh MP, so we're very pleased and appreciative of Safety First Wales's attempts to harass her and hold her to account. They were aiming to criminalise anyone who associates with sex workers and the advertising platforms that we depend on to be able to work more independently and safety. And then so finally, I think we were kind of asked to think of what our dreams for the future were. And I was thinking about it in relation to sex workers. And I don't think you can think of it only in relation to sex workers, because unless we all get some, you know, unless the world changes in our favour, we're not going to win decriminalisation. We're not going to win it in a vacuum. And one of our big priorities is to end women's poverty. It's to end women's poverty, which would mean ending children's poverty, because they talk about children's poverty as if children exist in a vacuum, and it's just not true. And so we are part of a campaign for a care income, which is demanding an income for the caregiving work of raising children and all the other vital caring work in society, not just for people, but also for the planet. And that's one of our dreams and aspirations. And it really would mean that we would be living in a world where women wouldn't have to choose between feeding your kids and breaking the law. So I think that, and I just wanted to finally say that in relation to Safety First Wales, it's a massive contribution to the sex worker movement that you exist and that you're here fighting in your particular corner, you know, of the movement, and we very much support your demands for the Senedd to take a position on decriminalisation, and that in itself would be a model and an example for all of us. So safety first always.
And I'm from San Francisco, where I organized with the U.S. Prostitutes Collective, which began in 1978, I believe, in New York as New York Pros, which was mainly black women. And then it grew into the U.S. Prostitutes Collective in the beginning of the 1980s. And we campaigned like others do.
Can you hear at the back?
Yeah. For decriminalization of sex work, for safety, and for resources, financial resources and other resources for sex workers. And we, you know, in our campaigning, I just wanted to mention a couple of victories that we've won over the course in California and San Francisco. One was we were approached by a sex worker who was brutally raped and beaten and went to claim compensation from the Victim Compensation Program. And they said, sorry, you don't qualify, you're a sex worker. And we have a regulation that excludes sex workers from compensation. And we were shocked, we didn't know about it, and very few people knew about it. And so we decided to do a campaign. We're going to get rid of this regulation. And for a year, we wrote letters, we protested, we went up and testified, and finally got a board hearing, you know, with the board of the compensation program. And they voted against the regulation. And one of the women on the board said, this is repugnant. I didn't even know we had this regulation. So it was a major victory. It was really big. And we had, you know, international press there. It was like one of the first breakthroughs in our campaigning. And then we also got policies in San Francisco prioritizing safety for sex worker policies that prohibit the police from arresting sex workers when sex workers go to report violence and rape. And we managed to get that statewide in California, so there are now those policies, and they can't use condoms as evidence. So we're really glad about that. And we've been running a project in San Francisco called the In Defense of Prostitute Women's Safety Project, which has been supported by a city department, government city department, since 1998. You know, it was probably the first time a city department in the US supported a sex worker group. And we've been speaking with them about, you know, the crisis going on in San Francisco with increased poverty against sex workers, mothers on the streets. There's one area of San Francisco called the Mission, where there was a big crackdown going on. The neighbors were complaining there were more women on the streets, and the police were out there driving their motorcycles around, really harassing the women. And you know, it was a major crisis. Everybody was talking about, what do we do about this? Also, they were taking moms' kids away. Social services were coming in, and you know, it was really an issue. And so we were talking to the city department. They said, why don't you do a proposal to us? Because at the same time, beginning in 2020 and from then onwards, there was a new movement in the US, which we were thrilled about, called the Guaranteed Income movement. You've probably heard about it, where the city or the local states give cash payments, regular cash payments, to groups that are, you know, traditionally discriminated against, and you know, these were starting to have success. That when you give people money, it changes their lives. You know, it has an impact. So they said, make a proposal to us. So we discussed it among ourselves and with our network, and we came up with what we wanted to propose was a guaranteed care income, like what Nikki was talking about, for single mothers at risk of criminalization and losing their children to child welfare. We didn't do a pilot just for sex workers because we were worried, and sex workers were worried, women were worried about having to come forward and identify yourself as a sex worker. And so we opened it up to single mothers. And it was an incredible piece of work because, you know, we didn't know really. We were a small group. How do you do a pilot program? But we figured it out, and reached out and found 10 single mothers. That was the funding that we got for 10 single mothers in San Francisco at risk of criminalization. And then we decided to, sorry, I lost my train of thought. At risk of criminalization. And because it was a care income, we explicitly wanted it to recognize value and compensate the caring work of single mothers. And we felt that being a mom is hard work and really deserves payment. So our program would pay the 10 single mothers for that work of caring for their children. And part of doing a guaranteed care income pilot is you need to do an evaluation so that you can evaluate, what is the impact on women's lives and mothers' lives. And so we found a group of evaluators who were really good and worked with us. And we did an evaluation. We did, at the beginning, the evaluators interviewed the mothers to ask them, what is your situation right now? And what is the situation with your kids? And then we set up the program in June 2024, last year. We began it. Took us a year to really implement it. And it went on until this year, June 2025. And when they first interviewed the mothers, they found that most of the mothers were really struggling. They weren't able to pay their bills. There were a couple of women living in cars with their children, and kind of staying with their friends. I mean, they felt they were depressed generally, struggling to make ends meet, not being able to pay their bills, suffering like anxiety of trying to take care of their kids, and being in a exhausted, depressed state. And then towards the end of the pilot, after a year, they did a second evaluation, and what came out was there was a massive change to their lives. I mean, if they give mothers money, everything changes. And we hoped the evaluation would show that, but it really did. I mean, women were able to pay their bills. They had be able to give their kids decent food. They were able to give healthy food, clothes for the children, and the children, their bonds with their children was better because they could take the kids out and they could have fun, do activities, and the relationships between the children improved. So the moms felt happier, the kids were happier. Nearly all the kids, the child welfare was changed because none of the women had interactions with the child welfare, and practically all the moms had interactions. Some of them had their kids taken away, and so that was improved. And none of the women, some of the women didn't have to go into prostitution, and they said, one woman said, I haven't had to do anything illegal during this year. So it did have an impact on the child welfare, less taking of children, less criminalization, better relationships among the families, and generally the women could pay off their debts. They could get a better car, not a car that's been broken down. And so we did, this is the evaluation that we came up with 30 pages to show the government that when you give women money, when you give mothers money, your lives improve. And so we hope that this is going to be spread around, and there'll be more programs once we can show the government this is what's needed. But what we want is not just pilots that last for a year and then what happens after the year. We want this guaranteed regular payment on an ongoing basis, because there was another, just to end, there was a child tax credit program in the US in 2021, I don't know if you've heard about it, where they expanded how many people could get child tax credits. And it was an enormous impact. I mean, the women it was the largest ever decline in child poverty in a single year. 50% of children came out of poverty. I mean, with regular cash payments, it only lasted a year and then they got rid of it. So we're going to use this guaranteed income pilot to press for child tax credits, for a regular income, regular payments on a monthly basis to mothers. Thanks.
around us, like none of this would have been possible without the genuine kind of collective effort of everybody involved. People have said quite a lot about where Safety First came from, how it kind of emerged, and since we had a launch in the Senedd last Christmas, about a year ago, wasn't it, where we launched the briefing paper, which we've got copies of here. It'd be great if you could take a copy and have a read. Since then, we've really been trying to kind of just build community and build the movement in different ways. So there's kind of two main functions, I think, to Safety First at the moment. One is kind of building solidarity and establishing working relationships with people internationally across the UK. And another part of that is also trying to be really kind of campaigning and lobbying local politicians and government. We've been talking about some of the resisting various bills and various policies around sexual exploitation, which we've been feeding into and contributing to. In Wales, we've also been doing a lot of work recently around a statement of opinion, which we're hoping is going to be passed in the Senedd in the new year, calling on Westminster, the Welsh Government calling on Westminster to end the criminalisation of sex work and to expunge criminal records. And this is something that we're in ongoing discussions with a number of MSs in Wales. They're kind of really keen of the idea of it. It's about how you make it work within the kind of the devolved settlement we have in the UK. So working with MSs in Wales and then also looking at MPs and how we can kind of coordinate that to be as good as possible or as strong as possible. We've also then, as people have been saying, been speaking with a number of MSs and Glenn as well also about the how we might incorporate the care income in Wales. So thank you so much, Rachel. We've been watching that for a while as it was kind of happening, waiting for the evaluation, and that's going to be really, really important because people kind of, I think, when we've had meetings with MSs, they like the idea of it, but they want to see the proof. They want to see the kind of evidence, and the evidence you're providing will be really, really helpful. So thank you. We're going to keep on with that work in the next, however long it takes, working towards kind of a care income in Wales, specifically prioritising resources to women at risk of criminalisation and losing custody of their children. So that's going to be kind of an ongoing political project. You're all welcome to get involved. Please do get in touch. We have our contact details in the briefing paper. You can find us on Instagram. We're all around. Get in touch. We're always really up for whatever people, any way you can help. We mentioned Tonya Antoniazzi, high-profile Welsh MPs at the moment, really being vocal in their calls for further criminalisation. We should all please email them, write to them, express your concerns, and get in touch with us if we can ever kind of work together. That would be great. But is that a reasonable summary? Yeah. So in the last year, we've been doing this basically, getting the zine together, doing all the collaborations, working with people across the UK, and we're really now working for the kind of care income stuff in Wales, and also work around the decriminalisation of sex work in Wales more broadly. So.
Sam, sorry. Just a question from me. We're not accepting questions, but I've got one. Have you done any research into prostitute caution?
Okay.
Like the effects of that, and I'm not sure if you've done any research surrounding the harms of criminalisation.
Okay, I can talk
Is
about
that.
Yeah. So in Wales, there's been this kind of my interactions with ECP and all this can kind of emerged where. In Wales, there's this kind of narrative that it's a nice, friendly place, which it is in a number of ways. Yeah, I genuinely believe that. It's lovely. But there's also the stuff Nikki was saying earlier, the kind of hostility of police. There are these narratives that interactions are being framed around where Wales is kind of prioritising welfare and safety. And I've been doing work around kind of researching sex work for nearly 10 years or so. And it was kind of really clear that the way in which politicians and the police and all these various people make sense of it, talk about it, was very, very different to the realities that sex workers were experiencing. And there were then a number of raids in Newport, which we were watching, kind of people being issued with public order offences or being threatened with public order offences. There's been stuff with kind of brothel closure orders happening in Swansea this summer, people being deported, people being kept on. There was a recent case of a woman being charged with brothel keeping. She was kept on ankle tag for a year, couldn't visit her families, had her passport removed. That hanging over her for a year, she finally went to court and they threw it out and said this is clearly nonsense. So this kind of stuff is rude. There's this kind of, when you look at the official statistics, South Wales Police can say we're not charging anybody, but it's not that they're not trying to charge people, and it's not that they're not doing this stuff. The violence is still there. It's just kind of hidden, and it's not hidden. It's less kind of it's different to how you might imagine it looking, and that's been the kind of work that Emma and I have been doing. I think in lots of different capacities is to try and And I always feel like a bit of an imposter because I'm not doing anything that no one hasn't said already, but the kind of like academic framing of things I think can sometimes be useful, trying to document it. Prostitute cautions, then Nikki was talking about, we've then done some research. Again, police in Wales saying they don't hand out prostitutes cautions, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a caution, can you say it, so they're not criminal court convictions, are they?
No, they're not criminal cautions. They're basically given out by the police when they believe that somebody's working, loitering and soliciting on the street. And so for women in our network, you can literally just be on the street and you can get a caution by the police driving by saying, I'm giving you a caution. Then there's no right of appeal, as Emma said, and it stays on your record until you are 100 years old. And obviously having that on your record bans you from travel, it stops you getting another job and leaving sex work if that's what you want to do, it can threaten custody of your kids, even things like going for insurance is on your record and it's a stigma and a discrimination. So it's a really massive thing. And yeah, sorry, you say like you
No, that's really helpful. And then disproportionately, kind of the gendered nature of work, care work, these are the things that require DBS
Yes.
checks and enhanced DBS checks. And we've done lots of work that shows that the disclosure barring service is, prostitutes cautions are being disclosed to employers regularly. So these things are showing up. So even if the police are saying, look, we're not arresting anybody, it's kind of irrelevant. These things have a legacy that lasts for people's lifetime. And there's also been an insistence. Sorry, my phone is hiding. If that's me, my phone's hiding behind there because it's playing good music. There's also been an insistence from South Wales Police that they've never given out a prostitute's caution. We've had people express that to our faces. We have people in our network who have been given prostitute's cautions by South Wales Police recently. So there's also, because they're not criminal, they're not recorded in the same way, there's this kind of invisibility that is really hard to trace and it's really intangible. And that's what the research has been kind of showing, hasn't it?
Yeah, very good.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm part of Sexworkers Wales and worked on that exhibition, and yeah, basically I'll keep it short. As a member of the community of South Wales, I'm disgusted to see politicians, government, police actively working to make people's lives worse, punishing poverty, punishing working people, when what they really should be focusing their energies on as government is ending the multiple genocides going around. Like, it seems so at odds with one another, the focus of people. Yeah, and I have a vested interest in the sex work community. And yeah.
And Stella's done an amazing job.
I obviously have the unenviable position of following the whole panel. I don't think I would do a great job of following any one of you, let alone all of you. But we are where we are, and for me, what I can say, you know, it's a privilege, it's an honour to be on this panel and to be beside and shoulder to shoulder with people fighting for their rights, advocating for themselves, because, and I don't need to tell the people in this room, there is a global, you know, across the world and here in Wales, a coordinated, well-organised, well-funded anti-rights movement determined to decide whose rights, whose bodies are deserving of protection, and it will take all of us working together, fighting for ourselves and each other to take the fight to them. So Amnesty International, I'm sure many of you know, it's a global movement of millions of people across the world committed to strengthening and defending human rights. And lots of people will know Amnesty International or remember us for our policy on sex workers' human rights. And some people would like to paint us as an outlier for our policy, which is in support of full decriminalisation. What's often overlooked is that our policy on sex workers' human rights goes much further than decriminalisation. It's really about realising and upholding all human rights for sex workers, the right to health, to housing, to non-discrimination, freedom from violence, to social security, and much, much more. And again, while some will say that we're an outlier, the truth is quite the opposite. You know, in December last year, we published a poll to over 2,000 adults across the UK, and it showed that the majority of the public, 61%, believe that it shouldn't be a crime for two or more sex workers to work together. More than half of the public they agree that consensual adult sex work should be fully decriminalised. So we've got not just Amnesty, we've got the RCN, the World Health Organization, we've got sex workers advocacy groups themselves, and the public at large agreeing, and yet we still don't have full decriminalisation. And you know, I think, Laura, the point you made earlier, when decision makers today want to understand the views of sex workers, they ask the police. Doesn't that just tell us everything that we need to know about how these people frame and perceive sex workers today? And then, of course, all of us have the right to consultation. We have a right to be involved in the decisions about our lives that affect our lives. And if you take sex workers out of that and you replace it with any other group, right, we would all see that for what it is. Everybody, not just those in this room. So our poll shows that the majority of the UK public wants the law to protect and not to punish sex workers. And the public agrees with what sex workers have long been calling for. And years of austerity and the cost of living crisis, you know, it's seen more and more people refusing the violence of poverty forced upon them. Rather than keeping these women safe, you know, and helping them to leave sex work if they so wish, the current law forces sex workers into precarious, dangerous, and isolating situations, and it can trap them in a cycle of poverty. So sex workers should be able to work together for safety, but instead criminalisation forces people to work alone, creates vulnerability, and increases violence and abuse. It blocks people too from accessing the healthcare and other vital services that all of us need and deserve. So full decriminalisation is the only option to keep sex workers safe, and it would allow them to work together for security, improve their ability to report violence to the authorities, and to access justice and support. Now, as Amnesty in Wales, what we're working to do is to push the Welsh Government to protect our everyday rights across the board. You know, and that includes the right to health, to housing, and to food. And it means protecting women's rights against discrimination. And we've heard from every member of the panel about how sex workers are systemically discriminated against in Wales, in the UK, and across the world today. And as part of this work, next month we're launching a new report. It's part of the cross-party group on human rights, and I'm really, really pleased to be able to say that working with Safety First Wales, we've ensured that the experiences of sex workers are included within that report. And across the UK, in Scotland and in Westminster, colleagues in Amnesty are working with sex workers advocacy groups to push for full decriminalisation. And Emma asked me to reflect on our dreams for the future of sex workers, and our mission, I suppose, is in Wales and across the world to bring about a world where everyone's human rights are respected, protected, and fulfilled. And so that means everybody is able to live their lives with dignity, with freedom, security, and without discrimination. What that means in practice, as all of us know, is tackling the cost of living crisis, tackling the housing crisis, and ending the endemic poverty that we see in this country and across the UK. It means supporting people, not punishing them, and it means listening to sex workers, not telling them what is best for them. Because exit services doesn't cut it, does it? What sex workers deserve, like all of us, is autonomy. And for our part as Amnesty International, we're here to support you and we'll continue to campaign alongside you.
There's a very moving little statement there about how most street workers, turns out, have had children taken away, and how absolutely devastating that is. And there are also women in our who come to our meetings who've been threatened with having children taken away because they're sex workers, and come up against very prejudicial and discriminatory social workers who say, oh, you must be a bad mum, oh, you're introducing your child to the sex industry, no, you're not. You know, things like that. And it's a bit classic that you go on the game because you're trying to feed your kids, and yet you're being then punished by social services for trying to feed your kids. And we all know that poverty, mums get accused of neglect, which is actually poverty, but then you refuse poverty and then you get punished by being threatened with having your kids taken away, which is, you know, completely outrageous. And just to say that the criminalisation obviously gives social workers that power to say, well, you're a bad mum and we can take your kids away. And so campaigning for decrim is really crucial. But I did want to just say that the climate, we feel like the climate is really changing, because just in the past year, the family courts have been open. Journalists can now go in and report what actually happens, which has up to now been completely behind closed doors, and that's really crucial. We've just recently had the victory that the presumption of contact, which is part of the law, which says that children should have contact with both parents, even when the father's a rapist, been violent, whatever. The government is now going to repeal that, which is something that we've campaigned for ever since we started, and we campaigned for the courts to be open as well. And we also got rid of the acceptability of parental alienation, which is what the abusive fathers accuse mothers of, who are trying to protect children from the violent men. So it feels like, and we know also, including from Wales, we know that social workers can do something different. Social services can choose to prioritise keeping children and families together if they put the resources in. And that's really crucial. That's what we want. And that's why, campaigning for a care income is really crucial to ending all the separations and ending women's poverty as well. Thank you.